Jake, Marissa, and Victor thought the marina was their personal playground, a place where wealth and privilege let them do whatever they wanted. But when their reckless actions began poisoning the waters and endangering wildlife, they were about to get a reality check they would never forget. The marina was alive with the hum of summer activity, the sunlight glinting off polished hulls as seagulls circled lazily above. Dockhands moved quickly along the piers, tying ropes and checking engines, while vacationers and locals alike strolled along the boardwalk. Amidst this usual bustle, a small group of boaters stood out. They were loud, confident, and above all, entitled. Their yachts were the largest in the harbor, gleaming in white and chrome, and their presence was impossible to ignore. They had arrived without invitation, but they acted as though the marina belonged solely to them. While other boaters navigated respectfully through the channels, this group ignored warnings and regulations, parking their vessels across narrow passages and blocking smaller boats from moving freely. Some locals whispered complaints, but most avoided confrontation, recognizing that these boaters carried the air of untouchable privilege. The group had come to the marina not for relaxation, but to assert dominance. Their parties were planned with meticulous excess, boasting live music, premium catering, and luxury decorations that drew attention and envy. It wasn't uncommon for them to splash through the calm waters recklessly, creating wakes that jolted smaller boats and left docks shaking. Yet their actions went largely unchecked. Staff and authorities had encountered them before, issuing minor fines that seemed to slide off like water on a polished deck. The boaters' sense of entitlement was reinforced every time someone turned a blind eye, convinced that nothing could halt their behavior. But beneath the surface of casual arrogance, tension was quietly building. Early one morning, a lone kayaker paddled through the marina and noticed the narrow channel that led to the open water had been blocked by a line of yachts. The boats were tightly packed, leaving barely enough room for a single small vessel to squeeze through. It was clear that this was deliberate, an assertion of dominance rather than an accident. The kayaker slowed, observing carefully, feeling a growing sense of unease. The water itself seemed different, almost restless, disturbed by the bold intrusion of these oversized boats. As the day wore on, subtle changes became harder to ignore. A faint chemical smell drifted along the docks, unusual for a place known for its fresh, salty air. Bits of debris and plastic floated near the blocked channel, catching the sunlight in a way that made them look almost deliberate. The staff noticed but hesitated, unsure if they were overreacting. Yet the combination of arrogance, obstruction, and an unusual odor planted a seed of suspicion. The calm, sunny marina had begun to feel tense, as if warning of an approaching storm. What started as casual frustration among the local community was quickly turning into quiet apprehension, though no one yet understood just how serious the situation would become. The following morning brought a tense atmosphere over the marina. Authorities had decided it was time to investigate the complaints, gathering environmental officers, local police, and harbor inspectors. They arrived with cameras, testing kits, and clipboards, expecting routine infractions, perhaps minor violations like noise, littering, or improperly moored boats. What they found, however, was far beyond ordinary rule-breaking. As they boarded the yachts, they noticed the smell of chemicals growing stronger, a pungent odor that seemed to cling to the polished decks. In hidden compartments and beneath floors, containers filled with toxic substances were discovered. The materials were improperly stored, some leaking slowly into the water, unnoticed for weeks, possibly months. The scale of the problem quickly became clear. The boaters' carelessness or perhaps deliberate negligence was now an environmental threat. Fish had begun washing ashore, their bodies stiff and lifeless. Birds, once frequent visitors to the marina, had vanished, leaving only scattered feathers as silent witnesses to the disruption. The normally sparkling waters had turned murky in places, a sheen of chemicals spreading over the surface. For the first time, the community realized the severity of what had been happening under their noses. These were not isolated mistakes. This was deliberate dumping that put the entire marina ecosystem at risk. Authorities moved quickly to contain the damage. Sections of the harbor were quarantined, warning signs were posted, and boating traffic was redirected to prevent further contamination. The boaters, however, initially laughed off the warnings. They assumed that their wealth and social influence could shield them from consequences, just as it had in the past. But as inspectors documented the evidence, photographs, samples, and eyewitness accounts, the facade of untouchability began to crumble. Every angle of every yacht revealed proof of violations, leaving no room for excuses. Meanwhile, the community's outrage intensified. Local residents who had tolerated the boaters' arrogance now faced the harsh reality of environmental damage, witnessing firsthand the impact on wildlife and water quality. Environmental activists began visiting the marina daily, documenting the consequences and pressuring authorities to act decisively. Each new piece of evidence amplified the urgency. The water was no longer a playground, but a crime scene. The boaters' calculated arrogance, once a symbol of their dominance, had become their undoing. Their disregard for rules and nature had sparked a chain reaction with consequences far beyond their control. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the situation was far from simple negligence. It was a deliberate and dangerous operation that threatened the community, the environment, and ultimately, the boaters themselves. The once peaceful marina had transformed into a battlefield of law, conscience, and accountability. As the investigation deepened, a startling revelation emerged that changed the entire scope of the case. What had initially appeared to be careless, entitled behavior now showed signs of deliberate criminal intent. One of the yacht owners, a man known for his brash personality and flamboyant lifestyle, was discovered to have a hidden criminal record. Years earlier, he had been involved in illegal dumping and fraudulent business schemes, a fact previously unknown to authorities and the local community. This discovery raised immediate questions. Had the entire group been knowingly engaging in hazardous behavior, or was it the initiative of a single mastermind? Inspectors began examining the yachts more closely, uncovering an intricate system designed to conceal evidence. Hidden compartments, false bottoms in storage areas, and tampered logs suggested the boaters had planned their operations carefully. Containers of chemicals were labeled deceptively, some marked as harmless substances while actually containing dangerous toxins. Records of purchases, when finally obtained, revealed transactions with illicit suppliers, indicating a coordinated effort to bypass environmental regulations for profit or convenience. The scope of the operation was far greater than anyone had imagined, and it became clear that the marina had been exploited as a dumping ground for months. Public reaction intensified as news outlets reported the details. Videos of the yachts blocking channels, the floating chemical containers, and images of dead wildlife circulated rapidly online. The boaters, once admired for their flashy lifestyle and large vessels, were suddenly vilified. The story spread beyond the local community, drawing attention from environmental organizations and government agencies. Their arrogance, previously tolerated or ignored, had become a symbol of disregard for law, nature, and public safety. Investigators also discovered that the group's actions had unintended consequences beyond environmental damage. Insurance claims and financial statements revealed that some of the yachts had been insured for far more than their actual value, raising suspicions of insurance fraud linked to the chemical dumping. Authorities realized that these boaters were not merely careless, they were exploiting every aspect of their wealth and status to gain advantage, putting lives, wildlife, and the local economy at risk. Meanwhile, the local community, initially shocked, began to mobilize. Residents, business owners, and environmental advocates rallied to support the investigation, documenting the ongoing damage and applying pressure on the authorities. What had begun as a small complaint about entitled behavior had evolved into a full-blown criminal case with far-reaching consequences. The yacht owners, whose power and privilege had once seemed absolute, were now facing evidence that could destroy their freedom and reputation. The once glamorous marina had transformed into a stage where arrogance, greed, and crime collided, and no one could predict how the story would end. The legal proceedings moved forward with unprecedented speed, driven by the overwhelming evidence against the boaters. Prosecutors presented a clear narrative. The group had knowingly violated environmental laws, deliberately obstructed waterways, and endangered wildlife and the community. Expert witnesses testified about the toxicity of the chemicals found on the yachts, explaining how even small amounts could cause long-term damage to the ecosystem. Scientists detailed how the local fish population had been decimated and migratory birds forced to abandon the area. Every expert account painted a stark picture of harm, leaving no room for doubt about the severity of the offenses. Courtroom sessions were tense and highly publicized. The boaters' arrogance, once visible in their casual disregard for rules, now appeared fragile in the face of mounting evidence. The group attempted to downplay their actions, presenting claims of ignorance or accidents. But the documentation was damning. Surveillance footage, environmental reports, and eyewitness testimony formed an irrefutable chain of proof. Even minor details such as logs of chemical purchases and photographs of the hidden compartments highlighted careful planning rather than negligence. The once entitled group, accustomed to escaping consequences, now faced scrutiny they could not evade. As the trial continued, the community's involvement grew. Residents, environmental activists, and local business owners attended sessions to witness justice unfold. Their presence added weight to the proceedings, showing that the impact of the boaters' actions extended far beyond the courtroom. Public outrage intensified when the depth of the deception was revealed. Financial records showed that the boaters had intentionally ignored safety measures to save money, treating the marina and surrounding waters as expendable resources. Their luxurious lifestyle, once admired as a symbol of success, became evidence of their greed and moral failure. Unexpected twists continued to emerge. Investigators discovered additional links to illegal suppliers, revealing that the boaters had sourced some of the chemicals knowingly from prohibited networks. This finding added serious criminal charges to the case, including conspiracy and organized environmental crime. The narrative shifted from careless behavior to intentional lawbreaking, showing that the group's entitlement was matched by calculated strategy. The boaters' defense crumbled under pressure, and their reputation deteriorated rapidly. Once perceived as glamorous figures dominating the marina, they were now seen as reckless criminals who had put profits and pride above safety, legality, and ethics. As the trial drew to a close, it became clear that the outcome would serve as a lasting example. No amount of wealth or social status could shield individuals from accountability when their actions caused real-world harm. The community watched closely, knowing that justice would redefine what it meant to be entitled on these waters. The verdicts were delivered on a brisk autumn morning, the courtroom packed with spectators eager to witness the culmination of months of investigation and trial. The entitled boaters, once untouchable in their luxury yachts and social circles, now faced the full consequences of their actions. The judge imposed hefty fines, criminal records were formally recorded, and several of the largest yachts were seized and auctioned to fund environmental cleanup efforts. The penalties were severe, leaving no doubt that privilege offered no immunity from justice. The marina, once a playground for reckless wealth, began a slow recovery, the water gradually clearing as hazardous materials were removed and the ecosystem began its tentative regeneration. The cleanup itself was grueling. Environmental teams worked tirelessly, removing contaminated soil and treating the water. Dead fish were collected and examined, and native plants were replanted along the shoreline. Even after the physical restoration, the memory of the boaters' reckless behavior lingered. Local residents and activists remained vigilant, ensuring that such blatant disregard for rules and nature would not happen again. Their commitment turned a community tragedy into a long-term lesson about responsibility and accountability. The story quickly became a cautionary tale far beyond the marina. News outlets, social media channels, and environmental organizations shared the dramatic rise and fall of the boaters, emphasizing the dangers of unchecked entitlement and greed. The viral coverage exposed their actions to a global audience, transforming personal scandal into a public lesson. What had begun as a local nuisance now stood as a universal warning. No wealth or status can override the law or escape scrutiny when harm is caused. Even the smallest details of the case carried symbolic weight. The lone kayaker who had first noticed the blocked channel was celebrated quietly, a reminder that vigilance, observation, and courage can spark profound change. One person's awareness had triggered investigations that ultimately held a group of reckless individuals accountable. The community, once passive observers of entitlement, now recognized its own power to enforce norms and protect shared spaces. In the aftermath, the entitled boaters faded from public life, their social influence and prestige shattered. Their yachts, once symbols of dominance and extravagance, were gone, leaving only memories of arrogance and the lasting impact of their crimes. The marina returned to calm waters, its beauty restored but its history forever marked. The lesson was clear. Arrogance may blind the powerful, but reality has a way of catching up. Wealth, privilege, and status cannot insulate anyone from the consequences of their actions, especially when the law and the community stand together. The waters reclaimed their peace, and the entitled boaters finally faced a reality they could not avoid.